When people talk about cancer, they often whisper. There's a heaviness in the air that comes with the word itself. It's not just a disease. It's almost like a symbol. For many, it represents the ultimate confrontation with fragility, with the idea that no matter how carefully we plan, how healthy we eat, or how much we love, something inside us can still turn against us, and that's terrifying. When I sit with patients or family members going through it, what I see first isn't just pain. It's confusion. It's the loss of something subtle, the quiet assumption that life will keep going the way it always has. Cancer takes that away. It replaces the background hum of normal life with a constant mental buzz. What if? What if this doesn't work? What if I can't be there for my kids? What if I lose myself before my body even gives out? It's strange because we live in an age of medical miracles. We can sequence genomes, design immunotherapies, and map the human brain. And yet, when it comes to cancer, so much of what people go through is profoundly emotional. It's not just the physical battle. It's the identity crisis that comes with it. I've had patients tell me that the moment they were diagnosed, it felt like time split in two. There was life before, and now there is life after. Every plan, every goal, every dream suddenly feels like it exists in a different universe. And what is fascinating and tragic is how our minds try to make sense of that. Some people go into control mode. They start researching obsessively, reading every medical article, every alternative treatment, every statistic. They cling to data because numbers feel solid when everything else feels fluid. But even that control is fragile because one bad scan, one new symptom, can shatter it. Others move in the opposite direction. They give up trying to control. They surrender completely, sometimes in a healthy way, sometimes not. They stop planning, stop hoping, and instead drift. It's not depression exactly. It's like a quiet resignation that life is now something that happens to them, not through them. And then there are those who find something entirely new in the process, a kind of spiritual awakening. It's ironic that facing death so directly can sometimes make people feel more alive than they've ever been. They start noticing things, the color of morning light, the way a child's laughter echoes, the feeling of air filling their lungs. It's like the trivial filters of life get stripped away. But it's also bittersweet because that clarity is born out of suffering. When we talk about the cancer industry, most people immediately think of the hospitals, the drugs, the money. And yes, there is a massive system built around it. But the real industry, the one I see every day, is emotional. It's made of people's hopes and fears being exchanged, sold, soothed, and sometimes exploited. Not always maliciously, often just mechanically. Doctors are trained to fix, but not always to feel. Patients are taught to fight, but not always to grieve. Families are told to be strong, but not taught how to crumble safely. There's a kind of silent economy of emotion in the cancer world. A patient gives hope to their family to protect them from despair. A spouse hides fear to keep their partner fighting. Nurses absorb grief every day and still smile because that's what the system expects. And when you add up all that suppressed emotion, it becomes this invisible weight pressing down on everyone. The truth is, cancer doesn't just attack the body. It infects meaning. It forces people to question the narrative of their own lives. What does success mean if time might be short? What does love mean if you might have to leave someone behind? What does faith mean when your prayers go unanswered? These are not questions that medical treatments can solve. I've seen people who were angry not at the disease, but at the randomness of it. A lifetime of doing everything right, and still it happens. That kind of betrayal cuts deep. It's like the universe breaking an unspoken promise. And when that happens, people start to see patterns that may not be there. They start looking for someone or something to blame. Sometimes it's doctors. Sometimes it's the system. Sometimes it's themselves. There's something profoundly human about that search for blame. It's not logical. It's emotional survival. Because if we can blame something, then the world still has order. But if it's truly random, then we're just exposed to chaos, and that's unbearable. One of the hardest parts of working in this space is realizing how emotionally lonely cancer can be. Even with friends, family, and support groups, there is a distance that appears, an invisible wall between the sick and the healthy. People want to help, but they also want to stay hopeful, and sometimes that hope invalidates the person's pain. Someone says, "You're strong, you'll beat this," when what the person really needs is, "I know you're scared, and I'm here." In therapy sessions, I've learned that honesty, not optimism, is what heals the most. When people can finally say, "I'm terrified," or "I'm angry that my life turned out this way," that's when they start to reclaim a sense of control. Because control doesn't always mean fixing. Sometimes it means feeling. The other quiet truth is how cancer affects identity. Many people feel like their body betrayed them. They used to see themselves as healthy, vibrant, capable. Now they see scars, weakness, fragility. Society doesn't help. There's a constant narrative of fighting cancer, being a warrior. While that's meant to empower, it can also make people feel like they're failing if they're scared or tired or just want to rest. Not everyone wants to be a warrior every day. Some just want to be human. And the families, they carry their own invisible cancer. The fear of losing someone they love, the exhaustion of caregiving, the guilt of feeling resentful for how hard it is. It's a kind of emotional metastasis. The disease spreads not just through cells, but through relationships. You start to see how the industry of cancer is both external and internal. There's the medical side, the treatments, the institutions, the policies, and then there's the psychological machinery that keeps people moving through it. Everyone has a role: the brave patient, the hopeful spouse, the heroic doctor. But underneath those roles are real, scared, exhausted human beings who just want to be seen. Sometimes I think the real dark truth into corruption or greed is emotional blindness. It's how a system built to save lives can sometimes forget to nurture souls. It's how we can measure survival rates down to decimal points, but not the quiet suffering that happens in waiting rooms. I once sat with a patient who told me, "I'm not afraid of dying, I'm afraid of disappearing." That stayed with me. Because at the end of all this, beyond scans, statistics, and treatments, what most people want is to matter. They want to know that their pain meant something, that their existence left a trace. And maybe that's the one thing we can all learn from this, that meaning doesn't come from longevity. It comes from connection. The way we show up for each other in these moments, that's what defines us far more than the disease ever could. What often goes unspoken in the world of cancer is how it quietly rearranges relationships. A diagnosis doesn't just change one life. It reshapes the entire emotional ecosystem around it. People start orbiting differently. Friends who were once constant suddenly drift away because they don't know what to say. Others, people you barely knew, come forward with a kind of fierce loyalty that surprises everyone. It's as if cancer exposes the emotional geometry of human connection. Who can handle truth? Who can't? Who shows up and who disappears into silence, and that silence is loud. Patients tell me that sometimes the worst pain isn't physical, it's the social isolation. People stop calling because they don't want to bother you. They don't invite you out because they think you need rest. But all those small decisions pile up into loneliness. The person living with cancer becomes an observer of their own life. They're surrounded by love, but it feels distant, like glass between two worlds. Families, too, experience a strange transformation. Everyone becomes hyper-aware of each other's moods. The air in the house thickens with unspoken worry. Parents who once argued about chores now argue about medication schedules. Couples who once dreamed about the future now whisper about hospital bills. And through it all, there's this quiet, relentless effort to keep things normal, even when nothing feels normal anymore. I think part of what breaks people isn't just the disease. It is the pressure to perform stability. To smile when you're scared. To say you're fine when you're not. Our society doesn't teach people how to be vulnerable without shame. We glorify resilience, but we rarely honor fragility. And yet, it's in fragility that real human connection lives. Sometimes I meet caregivers who feel guilty for being exhausted. They say things like, "I can't complain. I'm not the one who's sick. But what they don't realize is that caregiving itself is a form of quiet suffering. Watching someone you love deteriorate, feeling helpless, suppressing your own needs, that's a psychological burden few people are prepared for. The caregiver often becomes invisible, even to themselves. They forget to eat, to rest, to breathe. Their world becomes defined by someone else's pain, and the guilt for feeling tired only deepens the wound. There rests this paradox that happens. Both the patient and the caregiver start protecting each other from the truth. The patient hides fear to avoid worrying their loved ones. The caregiver hides tears to keep the patient hopeful. So everyone suffers silently, trying to be strong for everyone else. And beneath all that silence is a deep craving, not for positivity, but for permission. Permission to say, "This is unbearable." And maybe that's the dark psychological truth behind so many cancer journeys, that we are terrified of honesty. We think that admitting despair will make it real, but often it's the suppression that amplifies it. When we bottle our emotions long enough, they don't disappear. They metastasize into anxiety, resentment, numbness. I've seen people who survived cancer physically, but lost something internally. They survived in body, but not in spirit. The treatments ended, but they couldn't go back to who they were. They carried a kind of emotional scar, an awareness of fragility that never left. And society isn't great at holding space for that kind of recovery. Once you're cured, people expect celebration. They don't understand that even survival has grief in it. Grief for the person you used to be before everything changed. Some survivors describe an odd sense of guilt. They say, "Why me?" Not in the sense of victimhood, but in the sense of survival. They feel unworthy when others didn't make it. It's like being chosen by randomness carries both relief and shame, and that guilt can isolate them even more. The world moves on, but internally, they're still negotiating with death, still replaying moments, wondering why fate was merciful to them, but not to others. The human mind isn't built for that kind of existential math. It tries to find balance where there is none. It tries to give meaning to what's essentially chaos. And sometimes that search leads to healing, but sometimes it leads to obsession. People spend years trying to find lessons in their suffering. They say, "It must have happened for a reason." But I've learned that sometimes pain doesn't have a reason. It just is. And that as one of the hardest things for the human ego to accept, that life doesn't owe us fairness or explanation. When we can face that truth, when we stop demanding reasons and start embracing meaning, something changes. Because meaning isn't found in why we suffer. It's found in how we respond to suffering. It's in the moments of small grace. The nurse who holds your hand during a scan, the stranger who brings food without being asked the quiet night. When you finally cry and let the fear move through you instead of around you, those moments are where humanity lives. I've often wondered why some people emerge from cancer with this deep wisdom, while others come out bitter or broken. It's not about strength or faith, it's about integration. The people who heal psychologically aren't the ones who suppress pain. They're the ones who let it reshape them. They allow their worldview to be rewritten. They stop chasing their old life and start creating a new one that acknowledges both the beauty and the cruelty of existence. There's this idea in psychology called post-traumatic growth. It asks the phenomenon where people experience positive psychological change after trauma, a deeper appreciation for life, stronger relationships, new priorities. But what we often forget is that growth and suffering coexist. You don't transcend pain by denying it. You transcend it by letting it pass through you, layer by layer, until what's left isn't the pain itself, but the wisdom it left behind. That's what I wish more people understood about healing. It's not linear. It's not about moving on. It's about integration, learning to live with the ghost of what happened, learning to carry it gently, because you can't erase the shadow without erasing the light that created it. Sometimes when people say they've accepted their illness, what they really mean is they've made peace with uncertainty, and that's a powerful kind of peace. It's the understanding that control is an illusion, but choice is not. We can't always choose our circumstances, but we can choose our response. We can choose compassion over bitterness, presence over denial, honesty over performance. And maybe that's the real medicine, not the kind that comes in syringes or pills, but the kind that comes from human connection. The kind that reminds us that we are not just bodies with diseases, but souls with stories. When people feel truly seen, something shifts in them. Their nervous system relaxes. Their pain becomes a little less sharp, because suffering is magnified in isolation, but it softens in empathy. If I could teach one thing to everyone touched by cancer, patients, families, doctors, caregivers, it would be this. Honesty heals more than hope ever could. Hope can be fragile, but honesty is grounding. It lets people breathe again. It lets them grieve without guilt, rest without shame, and love without fear of pretending.